Okay, I have 11 o'clock on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Adapting to the Attention Ecosystem: Tips for Health Communicators. I'm Katrina Boylan. I am the program coordinator for Prevent Child Injury, and I have actually worked with the program since it started in some capacity. And so, if you've been a member of Prevent Child Injury for a while, you're definitely going to be familiar with my work. But I would also just like to take a minute to thank all of the members of Prevent Child Injury for your continued engagement with what we're producing and your support for Prevent Child Injury. Honestly, knowing you're out there helping kids and families and kind of people of all ages be safer and healthier really does keep us motivated to do what we can to support you in those activities. And so if you're watching this and you're not a member, you can go to preventchildinjury.org and you can sign up for free. But again, I just want to say thank you to all of our members for their continued support. One other note before we get started, again, this will be recorded and we will be sharing this on YouTube. We will not be sharing the slides though, so you'll have to go and watch the video. I did also want to note that all of the images that I'm using in this presentation today are from Canva, from AI generators, from publicly available image libraries, or I'm also going to use some screenshots of publicly available profiles and resources. So let's jump in. Why are we talking about this today? Now, I laughed when I saw this post because for me, it really illustrated how different not only the media landscape and the social media landscape they're just so different from where we started. Media used to just be the newspaper and the evening news, and now we've got 24/7 cable news channels. Social media used to be something that had an end, as this post reminds us. And now it's a never-ending stream of content. And now even we're getting content from accounts we don't even follow to keep us engaged and on those platforms. And so that's where the attention ecosystem comes in. The goal didn't used to be keeping you glued to an app or your phone or a website for as long as possible. There was an end. And that's all gone now. And so it's all about who can get and keep attention with so many things that are competing for it. And so what does that mean for us as health communicators? That never-ending scroll, all the platform options, the emphasis on video all means that I know we're trying to produce more and more on tighter timelines. We're often trying to do it with less support, with fewer skills, or maybe I don't have the skills to execute what I need to do. And honestly, we just don't have time to perfectly craft every message and design a new graphic or a new video for every topic we're covering. And so it gets overwhelming. And, here on our team, we are constantly evaluating and examining, kind of not only what we're doing, but also what our audience needs and how we can tailor our efforts to both maximize our own return on investment and effectively reach the people we need to with our messaging. So, in the next hour, I'm going to go through some factors that we are using to decide when, where, and how we are messaging. And we're going to start today with audience. Now, if you're on this call, I'm sure you're well aware of the concept of audience. But again, with all of these changes to how people are sharing and getting information, in many cases, our audience is no longer limited to geography or our followers on social media. Our audience could be anywhere getting that information at any time. And so, we really need to think very critically about who we want to find this information, who it's intended for, and get down to a greater degree of specificity than maybe we have before. And so once we can get that audience really narrowed down, and I'll break this down in just a second, we can do better at delivering a communications product that feels like it was intended for them. The other angle of audience that we are really considering right now is where they are. You know, there's no point in investing time and resources into a platform or a message that isn't the right one. If the audience isn't there or they're not looking for that information there, it doesn't matter how good the message is. It's just not going to land. So let's talk a little bit more about these two factors. So for us, especially in public health, we do tend to kind of default to the general public as our audience. But that's not very helpful because when you're trying to reach everyone, we just simply cannot get a message tailored enough to reach anyone. And so what we really do try is to, for every message, every campaign, even like the visuals, everything we're producing, we tried to get fairly specific into who exactly this message is for. It might be within the same campaign. If we're doing medicine safety, for instance, we might need to reach both parents of teenagers and parents of young kids, but those are going to be different messages. So we really do drill down into what you can see or hear on the right. We will go so far as to say, first of all, we're going to target parents rather than caregivers, grandparents, someplace else you might find medicine. We're gonna target parents of kids younger than 5, so young kids, and then also people who are storing those medications in the kitchen. So that's how specific we get when we design virtually any message that we're sending out. And so getting this specific helps us really avoid some common pitfalls in communication, and the first one is vague messaging. We see this all the time in public health. We see stay safe, talk to your doctor, be informed. But, okay, how do we stay safe? What happens if you don't have a doctor? Be informed. Where do you go for credible resources? I struggle with the language of learn about. We do use that at times, but most of the time we're pairing that with really specific actions. Go to this place to learn about this subject for this purpose, not just learn about what you can do to keep kids safe, things like that. And so knowing that we're really targeting, again, that very specific audience, and let's go back to the example, parents of kids younger than 5 who store their medicine in the kitchen. That helps us be very specific about how they can keep their kids safe, where they can go to maybe get a product, that a lock or a lockbox or something they might need to keep those medicines, safely away from those kiddos. So being specific helps us provide the information that people need in order to actually execute the action we're talking about. The next thing that it really does is it helps us identify very real differences in not only risks, but barriers to adoption as well. And so, thinking about medication safety, again, going back to that, if we're talking to parents of teenagers, we might have a slightly different message, a different angle than we are with young kids because the risk of um, intentional, kind of with teenagers, they might be going to seek that. They might be going to find that medication. And so it's a slightly different process than young kids who might be getting into it out of, kind of sheer opportunity. So that's a real different in risk. But if we don't message differently, we can't address that risk. In terms of barriers, one that I think up a lot is we did some messaging on stair gates. And the for stair gates, we put in a screwed in stair gate at the top of the stairs. And so what happens though for a parent who might be renting, for instance, and cannot put holes in their walls for fear of being evicted. And so we might have to change that messaging to say, if you are not allowed to do this, here are some workarounds that are safe as well. So again, getting specific helps us really figure out what's going on in the situation that we're trying to message to. And then the last thing that I think this really helps with is it helps us design messaging and visuals and all types of different communication products that make it feel like it's for them, that the audience can recognize that this is for me. And so I think about those of us in public health. We hear about jargon a lot, right? Don't use jargon. Funny enough, there is actually a time and place for jargon to make it feel like it's for them. If I'm trying to message clinicians, for instance, then I need to use language that they're going to recognize. And sometimes that's jargon. Public facing stuff, obviously, we're not going to want to do that. But again, there is a time and a place. And we know that language, not even the words we use, but the actual physical language is a huge marker that something is for me. I can remember having a little bit of a light bulb moment driving down the road and seeing a safe sleep billboard in Spanish. And I wasn't the target audience for that, and that's okay. We need we need different messages for different audiences. And so I recognized it was a safe sleep message, but I knew from the language that I wasn't the target audience. And so that to me, having my own reaction like that was such a just a it just really reinforced how important, again, that specific language, that literal language is when we're saying this message is for you. So if we know that we're trying to target an audience that might use a different language, you've got to be able to incorporate that. And I know many of you are, but again, I like to always just highlight the jargon thing because sometimes jargon is actually a good indicator that that message is for your audience. So just something to be thinking about when you're thinking about who exactly is your audience. And so when we get that granular, we can also then move to the next piece of this, which is where is my audience? Let's face it, we are all getting information from many different sources now. There's no one place anymore that people go to for information. And so what this means is that even if we're designing our messages well and we've got the best graphics in the world, if those messages are not showing up in a place where your audience is or is expecting them or wants to see them, then your message is going to fall flat. It's just not going to resonate. And so this is something we struggle with. We are often planning campaigns around what we're comfortable with, where we've posted the channels that we like and respond to. But if you're really trying to reach different audiences, we know we've really got to pull back and look at the whole landscape. And so when we're so focused on, I guess, what we're comfortable with, we are missing kind of huge opportunities. And so you know, audiences really are expecting to see different information in different spaces, but we're so limited as public health professionals in, kind of not only our time, but the resources and our own bandwidth and to create these things. And so when we're more specific about who that audience is, we can be more specific about where they're showing up, who's that trusted messenger, where do they want this information, where are they going for it? Because if they don't get those things all together, they're just going to scroll right past your information. And so again, audience is not a new concept for us at all, but there are different ways we can think about it to make sure that we are meeting our audience's needs in this particular ecosystem. So once we figured out the audience and defined it more specifically, we figured out where we can meet them. We need to be focusing on what I consider to be maybe the biggest, I don't know, virtue, I guess you could say, in social media right now is authenticity. I really believe that authenticity is what is creating attention. And it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for everybody. And especially in public health, we've got to be thinking about what is our role? What is our voice? That's not going to look the same for everybody. Authenticity doesn't mean, kind of bearing your soul and letting people into your the most private parts of your life. You know, it can be if that's who you are, but as a public health professional, I really think it's about, again, getting clear on what your role is for your audience and what your voice is, and then doing that in a way that your audience will value those contributions. And again, this isn't going to look the same for most of us. And so, here's an example of an account that I personally love. This is the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. It's a government account, but what I love about this account is that it takes something that is, somewhat boring and mundane, and people take for granted, and that's sewer and water infrastructure. But as you can see from this post, they add so much, I don't know, experience, I guess you could say, the experience of this to these posts. They're not just talking about the information, they're showing us how they experience it. And so I love this account because let's face it, emotions are what often gets our attention. And the fact that they frequently are pairing information with something that makes me feel something is what keeps me engaged with this account. And so I just think it's funny. If you're not familiar with this account, this is what their pinned post. This shows up at the top of every single one of their feeds, and it kind of shows you what I mean about offering a full experience. They have a point of view, they've got interests, they've got opinions about things that they love, Cleveland sports, the weather, mental health. Believe it or not, this account is a big proponent of mental health. And then a couple of pet causes that I've learned about over the years that, flushable wipes are not flushable, in fact. But again, it's this blend of information, like valuable information, but that's really in many cases only relevant to the citizens of Cleveland or those that are served by this. But the flushable wipe thing, that's going to benefit septic systems everywhere. But what I love again is the fact that it stays professional. It shows us the information they're talking about, but it matches it with emotion. And it also reflects the community it's in. They're talking about the Cleveland sports teams. It just shows a range of interests that reflects who the community is, who the audience is, the symbols, the events, the weather, even, right, that's affecting the people in that area. Um, I will say though that that approach isn't right for everyone. These are graphics that we've made for prevent child injury because for us, our voice for prevent child injury is a little more straightforward, a little more informative, but we always want to be friendly, but not necessarily kind of witty or making a lot of references to pop culture. Or you might have noticed on the previous slide they also said poop culture. We will not, that's just not our voice, that's not our goal. We really do want to support anybody who's trying to work with children and families or the public, by creating materials that are broad enough, maybe generic enough to be used widely, but also are specific enough in the message and have a point of view so that they resonate and can convey information to a specific audience. And so again, we really try to stick to casual, plain language. We really look for brighter, contrasting colors. And then polished but more basic designs. Those tend to be kind of the voice that we stick to for prevent child injury. But we're always looking for the emotion of upbeat, positive, showing people out there living and thriving. And so what we'll do then is, as you can see, we've got a bunch of different ways we'll talk about things. We do also try to keep it super short. We are not trying, we're not an account that or an organization that is going to do long posts. But as members, you've always got the chance to expand on that if you want to. But again, we're going at this with a much different role, a much different voice than an account like the one we just saw. And so, again, what your role and what your voice is will help you determine what is authentic to you. But in order for something to be authentic, you also have to be able to execute it in a way that makes sense for what you can do, what your skills allow, what your needs are. Now, here is Dr. Beach Gem 10, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She has an enormous following on TikTok and Instagram, millions and millions of followers. Um, what I think is really remarkable about her is she just oozes authenticity, in my opinion. She's so open with herself, yes, but also you'll see shots from inside the ER. This first one over here on the left is a screenshot of her literally in her own home, showing how she or how her family approaches securing medications and other, I think their alcohol and stuff is up there because they've got teenagers. But she's literally in her home showing you how she does it. She doesn't usually lead with her credentials. In many of these videos, she doesn't say, I'm an ER doc. And I think it's because, and this is just a guess, I think it's because if you're there watching and engaging with her, you probably already know that. She's already established some credibility with you. So she doesn't need to go back to it for every single video. And so I really think that some of these things help us trust her and make her feel authentic. But again, this isn't going to be the right approach for those of us who are running programs maybe, but if you're an individual out there doing that, This is actually a great way to help show a kind of authenticity is staying professional, showing your professional life, but also, giving some glimpses that there's a full human kind of behind the account. Now, one other note about Dr. Beachgem that I want to say for this audience is that I heard her say once that the reason she does TikTok videos and Instagram videos is because she doesn't like to speak in front of large groups. She wasn't comfortable maybe giving a speech or something like that, but she was comfortable talking to her phone. She had things she wanted to say, and then, was comfortable pulling out her phone and saying it, to a video screen. And so it's authentic for her because it meets her needs, right? She wanted to get that information out, but she did it in a way that matched her own skill set and matched who she is as a person. And so yes, she's a working professional, but I think this is a great example of how you can be professional and show just tons and tons of authenticity. Again, I think she's doing a great job here. So, other account that I wanted to talk about just for a second that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the Consumer Product Safety Commission social media accounts. I remember when they first started doing some of these kind of different approaches, you might say, to safety communications. I remember going over and talking to the team, like, have you seen what CPSC has been posting? And so we watched it very carefully. We talked about, kind of the wisdom of that strategy. But after hearing a little more from the guy who runs the account, we now understand how it came to be. These kind of weird memes and things were because the guy who's running the social media account has no budget whatsoever. And so he was limited to what he could get in the public domain or what he could get for free. And so he also didn't come from the public health world, and so I think some of those, different ideas maybe, could bubble up because he was kind of outside of the system, and so this again, though, is somebody who is executing a strategy that's right for their organization, their role, meets their needs, and is done in a way that their social media manager can do, and they've been wildly successful. This is just one of many examples we have of people saying, "I did something because of this account." They've reported products and anchored furniture and, done all kinds of things because the consumer product safety caught their attention with these weird memes and then shared that information. And so these are two more recent examples, and the reason I wanted to show these in addition is because I think the reason this account is successful is because organizations like this do need to be online a lot of the time. The way, again, this attention ecosystem is working, the never ending scroll, the constant feed means that we the people who are doing it well are there frequently. They're there a lot. And so these are two examples again, just recently from Consumer Product Safety Commission responding to comments. Again, even a kind of negative one saying, here comes the fun police. And they're like, well, maybe, but also we keep finding out it's true, that you actually have these faulty products. So, we're going to keep going with that. This other one on the right, I think was, just last week, or very recently, and so they were able to quickly respond to this and tie it back to a product that, again, those of us in child safety, the messaging on carbon monoxide is always how you can't see it and smell it, and so the fact that here's this movie reference, that then CPSC was able to quickly turn into something about product safety, that works really well for them because their guy is online a lot and it fits with his needs and his personality. I am not that way, I'll be honest. I just don't engage with social media that way. And so even if this were our strategy, I'm not sure I'd be the right person to execute it because it doesn't fit with my skill set and the way I work. It doesn't feel authentic to me. So I just want to be very clear about the fact that, we don't all need to be this, right? There are places and times for lots of different voices. And so I am glad the CPSC is out there doing something that isn't right for us because they are definitely reaching an audience that we wouldn't watch, or I'm sorry, we wouldn't reach. And so I do, though, want to point out that there are plenty of other accounts that are similar to what we're doing. And so I will frequently just go check out to see what other accounts are doing. And so here's one from the Yale School of, I'm sorry, this is the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, who has a really fantastic social media person. Yale actually has a great one too. But this account is a little more similar to kind of what we're after in our programs. And so I do like to go see kind of, what they've done recently and what they're up to. And so as you can see from this post, it's a little bit older. It's from a few months ago, but they took a recent event. It was Timothy Chalamet. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher his name. Timothy Chalamet was acknowledging, I think, his girlfriend, Kylie Jenner, for the first time. And so this meme was born and they adapted it for a flu shot. And so you might not be able to see it, but even the caption says, "We heart Timothy Chalamet, schedule your flu shot ASAP if you haven't already." So again, they took this current event, adapted it for their needs, matched their voices, matched their audience, matched all of the things I just discovered, and put out this post. And I just thought this was a great post. So I, like you, um, have been more focused on authenticity for one reason, and that is AI. Um, I think we're all highly aware of the role that AI is playing in our lives. But as it relates to communication, I think there's more to understand than what we might be seeing in the media. Um, we don't have time in this presentation to go into a super deep dive into AI. And so if you're not really familiar with how AI works, then I would recommend we have a video on an introduction to AI on the CERTC YouTube channel. If you go to CERTC, it's CIRTC _ is the handle. And there is an intro to AI video there. You can also scan the QR code that's here on this slide. But if you're not familiar with how it works, it's going to be really helpful for you to understand that. So I do recommend going and checking that out if you're kind of new to this field. So if you are using it though, and even if you're not, what we need to be aware of is how audiences are receiving AI generated content. The sentiment seems to be pretty high against AI right now, but depending on who your audience is, and what they're looking for and what they expect from you, sometimes obvious AI use is a good choice. It's funny, the CPSC doing these memes way back in the day. Now I would look at that and say that's AI, but I know they've been creating them for years, so I know it's not. But audiences are having a really hard time distinguishing what's AI and not. And so I think there's a trust gap here, right? And we know that people need to trust us in order for us to be able to effectively communicate. And so being aware of who your audience is, this again goes back to that really specific audience segmentation, might help you decide whether or not AI is going to be a good tool for whatever you're working on. For us, we used to use it. I think we're all using it a little different on our team, but I have actually found it most useful in image generation. What we're finding is that um, especially child safety, I'm sure you can all relate to the idea that we simply don't have the assets we need and many times to create the visuals to support the messaging we're doing. And so this is one place where I have found AI to be incredibly useful. Now, before we will use AI for image generation, we will always go to see, is there a stock photo? Is there, are there elements that we can use to create what we need? Because again, audiences aren't universally receptive to clearly AI generated images. So if we can find something else, great. But one thing I've noticed is that even a lot of those images now people write off as fake. So we're in a little bit of a sticky spot here. But where we again found it really helpful is to find maybe a little more of the niche topics that we sometimes do. So this picture was from kind of our first attempts years and years ago, actually probably about 2022 at this point, with image generation. And so you can see again, it's got that all the hallmarks of early image generation. It's got that kind of soft fuzzy lighting, but we couldn't find pictures of kids in high chairs in anything other than the most high-end gleaming white kitchens you can possibly find, and I don't know about you, my kitchen looks nothing like that. And so we wanted to find some imagery that better reflected what homes might actually look like. And so again, we tried to generate here, but that's such a fuzzy, soft lit image that it just instantly, it was generated by AI. Got a little better for our next round. Again, we still have some problems here, but here's another topic where we really struggle to find imagery is lawn mowing. Um, if you look out there, the stock photos, if we can find ones that actually match the safety recommendations, chances are, it's just maybe not reflecting the types of communities that we're looking to reach. And so we were trying to find imagery of a mom teaching a daughter how to mow the lawn and couldn't find one. And so again, this one isn't usable. It's still got some of that fuzziness, some of that weird lighting, clearly AI generated. We got a lot better though a couple of years ago when ChatGPT upgraded. This image on the bottom left is for fireplace safety. And I got this out of ChatGPT and thought, that's a usable image with one exception. I could not get ChatGPT to put glass doors on the front of this fireplace, which is one of the safety precautions that we recommend for fireplaces. And so we had a graphic designer on the team at the time, and she was able to pull this into Photoshop and add some glass doors for us. But again, this image got close enough that with a few tweaks, I think this is an actual a usable image. It does to me look AI generated, but it to me is not so egregious that I think it would take away from the message. Now, the one that I am currently using the most is Nano Banana Pro. That is, I think it's Gemini AI that powers it. It's Google. But this bottom right was generated just a few months ago. We were doing a scalds prevention campaign, and I didn't have a good photo of a travel mug sitting away from the edge of the counter because again, I'm trying to hit all my safety points here, and we say put your hot drinks away from the edge of the counter. So I needed to find a photo to back this up. I couldn't figure this out, and honestly, I was trying to build it in Canva, and the illustrated look just wasn't right for this. And so I went into Nano Banana Pro, and after I think this was my second prompt actually. The first one, I didn't specify that it was in the center of the counter, and so it was right on the edge. And then I specified in the prompt, move it to the center of the counter or away from the edge of the counter. And so this was the image that I got. So again, those of us in injury prevention that are looking for these assets, we need to be using these judiciously for a lot of good reasons. But I personally think AI can really help us fill some of the gaps that we're seeing in the visuals that we need in order to be effective communicators. Um, some of the pitfalls of AI, though, I think are going more towards the writing side of things. So this upper left post is one that I created last year, I'll be honest. And I went ahead and posted it with a few tweaks to this is the text. That's what I'm talking about here because um, we hadn't quite had the backlash yet, I think, to AI generated posts. But now I probably wouldn't use this because I can spot this as AI generated from a mile away. And the fact that it's got these emojis in kind of a bulleted format, that to me is a dead giveaway that it was created by AI. Not always the worst thing in the world, but that's just not what I think we want for our voice and our persona. And so I might still use AI to give me ideas or to generate something from the start, but I am always going to tweak it a little bit. Just because I know myself, I am more likely to skip content that I think is AI generated myself. And so I'm going to assume my audience is doing the same. And so again, you can start there, but make sure you're tweaking it a little bit or changing a little bit so that it's not clearly just kind of straight out of AI. Now, on the bottom right, this is one that's personal to our team. The idea of disgraced punctuation or the idea that certain pieces of punctuation mean you used AI. Now, that's a problem for us because I know at least two, if not all members of our team, the M dash is our favorite piece of punctuation. I personally, I've loved the M dash since I was in high school. And so the idea that the M dash is now an indicator that something is fake is problematic for me because we use it all the time. And, it makes sense that the M dash is now a marker of this is because these AI models were trained on writing and good writers use M dashes. And so it's frustrating for those of us who write for a living um, because we're trying to reclaim the M dash. Now, the other one that I think is interesting is a colon in a title. So, much as I use for this one, the health tips for health communicators. So that is a giveaway now for AI use. But again, we've been using this for years in public health and academia. And so I do think that the reason for this is because they were trained on what we were doing already. So it's something to be aware of. But honestly, we're going to keep going with it because I'm not gonna bend over backwards to not use an M dash if it's not the right piece of punctuation. And honestly, titles with colons in them are just useful. So we're just gonna keep continuing, but it is something to be aware of is how audiences are perceiving things that are generated by AI. Now, the next piece is a big one, and that is the algorithms that are governing what we see. You know, every platform out there has a confident or a proprietary algorithm, one that they change a lot and usually don't publish so that we can't, as content creators, kind of game the system. But it does decide what we see. It used to be that um, if you followed an account, then you would see their content, but that's not how that works anymore. I don't know about you. If I open up Instagram or something like that, an awful lot of that content is from accounts that I don't follow, and so I might not see the accounts I follow. I might get more of things I don't follow, and so how do we get around this as public health professionals? If we can't say, go follow us here and you'll get the information, how can we do a better job of getting that information out, knowing what that algorithm is going to do? It's engagement. I will say engagement is what drives virtually every single algorithm out there right now. That's really tough for us in public health for a lot of reasons. I know that, even if I find something useful, if it's not emotional in some way or not personal in some way, I might not like it or share it or leave a comment. Those things are all indicators to the algorithm. And I'll show you how the algorithm works in a second. But all of that engagement tells the algorithm that this is good content and they'll share it with other users. But if we don't get that engagement, our content will just kind of go nowhere. Now, I do have a tip for anybody listening that I shared in a webinar a few months ago, which is we used to not like or comment on our own posts. I guess I always thought it was a little cringe maybe, or just, it just didn't feel right in some way. But the way the algorithms work now, that early engagement will boost your reach significantly. So again, I gave this tip out on a webinar a few months ago, and I heard back from one of the participants who said she had implemented this tip and saw between 50% and 200% growth in their engagement rates just even I think it was across X, Instagram, and LinkedIn, if I recall. And so, one strategy I do is if I'm gonna use hashtags, I will usually put those in the first comment on the post, because that again, the comments really do drive the algorithm. But don't be afraid to be your own promoter, I guess is my point. I will go in from my personal account. We run a couple of different accounts, and the more that we can use the things in our control to provide that early engagement, the more it will signal to the algorithm that this is good content and thus push it out. Now, we do want to also start with what we know the algorithm likes. And that's video. Pretty much all of the algorithms now prioritize video and, in fact, are downgrading links. I know Facebook will downgrade a link. In fact, like it just Facebook hates links. LinkedIn is a little cagey about whether they do. Anecdotally, it seems like they do, but they swear they don't. I don't know. To my knowledge, the only platform that doesn't specifically downgrade links is Blue Sky. Instagram, it's so hard to engage with links. I don't know exactly how they're handling that, but again, in terms of LinkedIn and Facebook or the various text-based platforms, again, Blue Sky is the only one that will not downgrade a link automatically. But again, video is king, especially vertical video is king. So again, the TikToks, the Instagrams, even on LinkedIn and Facebook, video is going to be prioritized in that algorithm. And so this is an example of what TikTok's algorithm looks like. It's a little more complex than this, obviously. This is a simplified version, but you can see how this works. So let's say you're posting your video. TikTok will push it out to a segment of your viewers. From my understanding, it's maybe 10, 15, 20% of your followers. Then, if people engage with it, like, share, comment, those things, it goes, "Oh, this is good content," and the algorithm will push it out to more people. But as soon as it starts seeing diminishing returns, it'll cut it off because the goal of the algorithm is to keep your audience's attention to stay in the app or on that platform or on that website. And so if it's like, "Oh, this isn't getting good attention or getting good engagement," it's not gonna keep the attention of the next user either, and then, as you see, it's gonna end the push to the viewers. So that engagement, that early engagement will juice the early part of the algorithm and say, "This is good content. Let's go ahead and share this with more." All right. So, one other note on that though is that I do also want to say these are different for the different channels, and so if you are heavily invested in a specific channel, I do recommend finding out as much as you can about how their algorithm works, and then adapting your strategy to maximize the kind of key points where you need to maybe take some action to keep pushing that out to your audience. Okay. The last thing that we are really looking at is accuracy. And, none of us, this is not new to any of us, that misinformation and disinformation are traveling faster and farther than ever. And so we are really evaluating what does it mean to be sharing accurate, actionable messaging. Um, so what we did was we've kind of expanded our definition because accuracy now isn't just about being factually right. It's also about being able to be heard accurately, believed, and understood. And so when we are operating in this environment where, again, misinformation and disinformation is just everywhere. And AI has, kind of removed any barrier to creating fake content, false content, different things that are going to, go against what our goals are. And so we've got to find new ways to fight against that. And for us, this really means thinking about accuracy as more of an ecosystem or more of an actionable plan rather than something where like, well, the facts are correct, it's accurate. And so we really do think about um, verification of the content. So just because we're sharing it and it's good here doesn't mean that somebody else has shared it. As Prevent Child Injury, I will say a lot of people do use our materials or take talking points from our materials. And so for us, it means I do go out and check sometimes to make sure that people are getting the messaging right. And so I will go and verify, are people talking about what we're talking about in an accurate manner? Trusted messengers. I mean, let's face it, COVID laid this one bare for us about how people will just reject a message, even if it's factually accurate, if they don't trust that messenger. And then the people that they do trust, or the voices they trust, might be again going against our goals. And so recognizing that we aren't always the trusted messenger. I'm not the right voice for every message for every person. And so trying to think about again who that is. But going back to what I talked about in the very beginning, that audience segmentation also informs us, who might be a trusted messenger to this audience, if it's not me. We also make sure that we're out there listening. I will say we just did some stuff on e-bikes and e-scooters, and I think that that's because it's such a new topic. We had to do a lot of listening first to figure out, what's going on with this? Why are people buying their kids these products? Kind of what's the context that these injuries are happening in? And what we're hearing back, we can then say, all right, we can address that. Maybe it's a myth. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding of risk, or, something like that. But if we don't listen first, we can't find common ground with where our audience is. And this is especially true if it's an audience that's tougher to reach. So we are trying to do a better job, I think, of trying to hear what our audience has to say before we go in and design messaging, so that maybe we can find that common ground a little more easily. And then the last piece that I'm going to recommend is some type of response plan. So many of you, again, are going to be out there posting about something that might be controversial. And so, how is your organization going to respond to this? This goes back to your voice, your role, your purpose, your goals, and who that audience is. But I personally think that, we've got to be there, pushing back on those things when they show up in our spaces. Doesn't mean you have to go into other spaces to push back on it, right? If that's your job, then that's your job. But, if I'm posting something about e-bikes or something, and somebody comes in and says, I disagree, we need to be able to respond to that in a timely manner, and in a way that hears what that person is saying, and then responds in a way that addresses those concerns maybe, but still sticks to our goals and our, kind of talking points, or whatever it is we're advocating for. This is gonna look different for everybody. And so we do have, so the Public Health, Communications Collaborative, it's just Public Health Communicate or I'm sorry, Public Health Collabor blah, publichealthcollaborative.org does have some good resources on how to fight misinformation and disinformation. And then also, any of you that have listened to our podcast, Communications Breakdown, we do have an episode. It's a couple back at this point, from Dr. Brian Southwell, who has spent a career kind of looking at the way we communicate, the systems, and then more recently, health misinformation and disinformation, um, and how we can respond to different types of public health, um, again, the misinformation and disinformation. So, um, I do recommend, again, Brian Southwell's research and the Public Health Communications Collaborative if you need more information about how how to combat misinformation and disinformation. Okay, so we're getting to the end here, and if you've ever worked with us, or you've listened to our podcast, we're always asking so one question, and that is, so what? And so here is what I want to leave you with today. The first thing is that good communication really does require us to know both our kind of role and voice and needs, and what our audience needs from us. If we're not providing the information they're looking for, then, we're just going to miss them completely. I also would encourage you to use AI thoughtfully. Again, I think it's great for some purposes, but it might not always resonate with your audience. And so thinking about what your audience is looking for, what they value, and what they're looking for from you can help you make some good decisions about when is this, probably an okay thing to do, versus maybe try a different route. And then the last thing I really want to leave everybody with is that we need to be going where our audiences are. And then we really need to be doing a better job of matching that platform with our content approach. Um, I really, again, we've talked about video and how that is king right now. We're not on TikTok for example, because we currently don't have those skills. And so I guess what I want to say about this though is that what we are trying to do is we recognize where our audience is. And if we don't have the right skills, if we don't have the right voice, if we're not the trusted messenger, we want to go find somebody to work with that maybe can provide those things for us. Instead of us trying to go in and do it ourselves, we're not gonna come off as authentic. It's probably not gonna land, and it's probably not gonna be a good use of our limited time and resources. And so I just with all of the different options out there, the platforms, the types of content, the numbers of audiences, we can segment this audience, any audience down, to, a million different little slices. So for us, we're really trying to consider what our audience needs from us, what's our role for our audience, where they are, where they want this information, how they want this information, and then trying our best to deliver it that way. But again, recognizing that if any of those things don't align, we're probably not going to have the most effective communication. So, all right. Just a few more things here. We do have some resources available over at the Center for Injury Research, Translation, and Communication, also known as CERTC. That is our kind of education and outreach arm, trying to help different people, improve their communications, reach more audiences, and create more effective health messaging. So we do have some databases of different tools and resources over at CIRTC.org. That's CIRTC.org. As I mentioned, we also do have a YouTube channel that's full of videos like this one, honestly, but also different types of communications, tips, practices, different things that we've encountered in training over the years. So we launched that YouTube channel to put them all there. And then finally, I did mention my colleague Tracy and I have a podcast called Communications Breakdown, where we really try to take what we're working on at any given time and break down what's working and maybe what's not working in our health com practices. And so you can find that at communicationsbreakdown.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. And so finally, if you do want to contact me directly, if you've got questions or anything, you can email me at katrina.boylan@nationwidechildrens.org. And again, as somebody who's been running the Prevent Child Injury program for quite some time, I'm just, again, want to thank everybody who has, supported us and supported the program and found that, maybe our materials or something we've put out is useful in your own practice. So, with that, I am going to stop sharing and we'll see if we've got questions. So let me go. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. Okay, so it looks like Tracy's put a bunch of stuff in the chat. Yeah, so if you look in the chat, if you're looking for some of the resources that I just talked about. She did put some of those in. Looks like I'm not seeing any questions for the moment, so we'll just sit.
There is one, Katrina,
Is there?
from Jennifer in the Q&A that
Oh,
says,
okay.
with new accessibility standards, our habit of using images with lots of text layered over them will need to evolve. Any tips for meeting new standards when communicating safety messages?
Yeah, so I actually don't think that piece needs to change. We just need to make sure we're writing alt text. If you don't know how to add alt text to the platform, well, first of all, I should just say, if you're not familiar, alt text is short for alternative text. So it's the written description of the visual that you're providing. If you're doing a video, it's a longer visual description. But we make sure no matter what amount of text is on our graphics, we're always going to be putting in alt text. It's a little harder to get to on Instagram. The text services tend to make it a little easier, but I personally am not opposed to tons of text if it is right for your audience and your needs. I will stop and read some if it's content that I'm actually interested in, but I'm not somebody who needs the alt text either. And so I guess like I'm trying to think, I can see it if I'm on like Blue Sky or LinkedIn. I'm not entirely sure how you find it if you're on Instagram though. I know we add it in the back end, but I'm not sure how you actually see it. So I personally don't think words on graphics are a problem if you're supplying what people who can't see those need. One other caveat with that, though, that we see a lot, which is contrast requirements. I actually think one of the bigger problems with words on text, or I'm sorry, words on imagery, is that it will not meet your contrast requirements. And so that's a different accessibility issue. Um, that's honestly something that if you're not running your contrast checker in Canva, if you're not running your contrast checker in Link, or I'm sorry, in PowerPoint, you're probably not giving your audience what they need to actually see that, um, have that text pop off of the visual. So in public health, I still think it's probably best practice to limit the number of words you've got on your page or on your visual. But, I'm thinking back to the flotation devices graphic that I showed earlier. That has a decent amount of text on it. And so, as long as I'm writing out in the alt text or in the caption or someplace else describing what that image is and what the text is, I don't think it's a problem personally. You might not get the attention you're looking for, right? Or the engagement. But in terms of accessibility, do your alt text, run your contrast checker. But otherwise, I think it's okay. All right. Anything else in there, Tracy? I actually don't have
Y-
the.
Yep.
Okay.
Should messaging still be tested in focus groups when possible?
Yes, when possible. I think that's the key word there, though, right? I don't know about you guys. We don't have money for this usually. We've gotten to do stuff in the past, and so it's always fabulous when we can do those, true focus groups. If we can't, I even like to just do what are the people around me that might be in this audience that can give me even just an N01 feedback. So when my nieces were little, for instance, I might run it past my sister-in-law to say, does this make sense to you? Or would you stop and look at this? Or would you use this information? I can remember we did a campaign on farm safety, and we found a professor. We're in Columbus, Ohio. We have Ohio State here, which has a large agricultural element. And so we worked with a professor over at Ohio State, and she had access to some farmers who just took a look at our materials and just gave us, I don't think it was many, maybe three or four, to give us just some feedback on, are we on the right track or are we totally missing it? So if you can focus group, this is where your listening is going to need to come in. If they're coming back and saying to you, these materials don't work, I will just tell you, I have seen too many times that the response is, well, we just need to be louder, or we just need to change their minds for that. They're not listening to the reasons that those messages are failing. And thus, when they redesign them, they don't work any better. So if you are doing those focus groups, make sure you're really listening to what people are saying. And if they're saying, this is unworkable for me, you need to be asking why, and changing your messaging and what you're saying about it. So again, if you can get to those focus groups, great. Again, I just know that many of us, we simply don't have the funding for that. So if you can run it past literally anybody in your targeted audience, then I think you're gonna at least get, some information that you can use. Okay. I think then was that about it? Yep, I don't see anything else come in. So, it is 11:59, and I think we'll just wrap up here. Again, I just really appreciate everyone's attendance today. I appreciate your dedication to health communication and to, I think, just, trying to make this world a better place. So, thank you so much for your attendance today. And again, we'll post this on YouTube and send that link around. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.